We're live with Kevin Coates, the man, the
I
myth, the legend. I love this man.
don't know about that. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, of course, man. It's been a long time since we've chatted.
Yeah, 2 years. 2 years. It's been about 2 years.
And that's on me. You were probably episode 6 or 7 of the
Seven.
podcast. Man.
Seven. Yeah. Yep. When you
Yep.
first started.
Yep. And we launched in June 2 years ago. So this is exactly our 2 year anniversary. And man, I just want to know what's happening in your world and catch me up. How is shelter in place working for you, brother?
I mean, it's been good. I won't say it hasn't been challenging, but I think it's all the mentality and the mindset. So, just trying to stay within a routine, eating well, working out, uh, working on my projects, which that can be a little difficult because, you can't really interact with people. Some of the projects, require other people. So, just trying to stay disciplined, keep a good optimistic outlook about everything. I think we're going to come out of this pretty well. A lot of sacrifice, man. It's been a lot of sacrifice. So yeah, I'm just staying positive about
Yeah. What specifically are you talking about when you say sacrifice?
it. Financially, time, attention to detail, relationships. I think a lot of people at one point, they complain maybe about not wanting to go to work, right? And not enjoying the job that they were once working in. Now you're getting some humble pie. And, you know, some of the behaviors that we have to, follow are sacrificial. We can't go to work and make money and uh, nurture friendships and maybe even long distance relationships. It's a
Mhm.
lot of sacrifice. Now we're doing a lot of video calling. Now we're talking through Zoom and, I don't even know if Skype's a thing anymore, but, we're having to do other means of communication. So a lot of that takes sacrifice.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. And for me, sacrifice at this time, I'm calling it solitude and not isolation,
For
just to
sure.
put that different mindset on it,
Yeah.
um, where I can take the opportunity to sacrifice dinners out,
Right.
which was
Right.
never really
Mhm.
tops on my list or high up in my budget per se, because business owner,
Right.
I'm a busy person, and what I'm sacrificing most is what needed to die in the first place, which was my old life of go,
Yeah.
go, go,
Yeah.
and that hamster wheel of just
Mhm.
straight up, straight
For
up,
sure.
just go until you quit and get sick or shoot, just fall apart.
Yeah. To that point, Dave, there's a lot of upside to all of this. I think any experience in life, there's upside to it. It just depends on how you choose to look at it. We're I don't even need to go into all the details of the gains that we've gotten out of this. It's teaching us a lot. We're being humble.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think those who haven't been tested in life probably take this a little bit harder, and that's where we see a lot of the suicide rates and the increase in depression and abuse and just those emotional regulatory skills and not really knowing how to nurture that or even being aware of where to start. So we're being taught a lot right now, and it's humbling. But again, it depends on how you look at it, your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've dug a little bit deeper into is these five
Mhm.
stages of grief
Mhm.
and the fact that depression is stage 4. It's a natural healing process of grief where we're facing that feeling of sadness
For
and
sure.
a low point in our life. But what I think is more important and what I wanted to ask you first is, what does an anxious mind want? And how do we self-soothe that during this time?
I love your question because I've been doing kind of like a little mini series of what does, and I know you've probably seen it. And the questions come from a lot of different conversations I've had with clients, and not only do I life coach, but I work with a rural mental health. So I work with veterans, and I deal a lot with suicide prevention and depression, schizophrenia, just stuff like that. And what does an anxious mind want? I think it wants calmness and stillness. I think it wants the rambling thoughts to diminish,
Mm-hmm.
little by little. And I truly believe that in terms of anxiety and an anxious state, it's something that's built on. You know, you become really anxious more and more as you think of a reoccurring thought. And so to counter that or get towards the light of the darkness, that also takes some gradual awareness and progression to be cognizant of what it is that's causing the anxiousness. You know, right now there's a lot of anxiety, you know, and it's overwhelming for a lot of people because not only is money an issue, it's time, it's freedom. You know, people feel constrained, you know, in the way they feel claustrophobic in every aspect of their lives, and that produces anxiety, and people have different levels of anxiety.
Yep. You're spot on with the answer to the question of what does an anxious mind want? And that is calmness. And the way that it goes about it, in my opinion, is it
Mm-hmm.
seeks out answers
For sure.
for all those questions that are going on in our minds.
Right.
So um, what I like to fall back on, and I was
Mm-hmm.
having this conversation a couple weeks ago with a men's group I'm a part of through church, and we were talking about anxiety attacks. And in my perspective, I haven't had one in about a year and a half, which is really surprising that during this time where cortisol levels are through the roof
Right.
individually and collectively, I haven't had an anxiety
Good
attack.
for you, man. That's good. Good for you.
I'm I'm so blessed. I'm so lucky to have these tools in my toolbox to actually
Mm-hmm.
self-soothe during that time. But what I understand about me is that when I'm feeling that anxiousness, I can't go seeking out the answers because I don't have them anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But who does? I mean, God has the answers. So
for sure.
I turn back to journaling and I turn back to meditation. And now I'm adding in breath work. And it's just this opportunity for me to, during solitude, sacrifice the old way for the new.
For sure. I had a it's funny you say the old way for the new. I had a call yesterday with a 18-year-old young lady. She's been, you know, working through some anxiety and relationship stuff. And one of the things that really stood out to her was I want to get back to my old self, which was a healthier version, which was a happier version of who she was before this previous relationship. Um, and I commended her because she was aware that that person does exist. That person may not be alive and well right now, but that person does exist. And the fact that you are aware that you can get to that state, that mental state, that you can be this person with these habits and these boundaries and all the things that you were before doing meditation and Reiki, that's a start. Is to be aware that that does exist. And I think some of the anxiety that does get created, um, people, whatever your source is or your faith, right? People don't know exactly where to start. And that can feel suffocated and overwhelming. And tackling everything all at once doesn't really bring great benefit. It creates more anxiety and more overwhelm. And so just little baby steps really help.
Yeah, I completely agree that the most important thing to do in that moment is to begin.
Yeah.
There's no one path laid out there for
Nope.
anyone. Like
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes we do hit a rock bottom, maybe somewhere close to where your 18-year-old is talking about. And along the way to return to ourselves or to rebuild a new version of ourselves, we're shedding layers during that time.
Right, right.
And we might be shedding the old and replacing it with entirely new,
Exactly.
thicker, more resilient skin.
Yeah, exactly, Dave. No, 100% agree, man.
Yeah. So, what other questions come up from these one-on-one conversations? I see you posting a lot, and I want to answer as often as I possibly can. Uh, you know, my daughter's about to graduate high school this month. What does the teenage mind want right now?
The teenage mind. Wow. You know, when I posted that question, I received, I say we received a lot of great feedback because, you know, I don't post the question just for my own benefit. You know, I love to learn about everybody's insights. And then what I love to see is that everybody, you know, they support each other's and respect each other's opinion. Right now in the teenage mind, in my opinion, what does it want? I think it wants to find its identity and its belonging in the world. I think it wants to find its voice, which is part of the identity, and be confident that that voice is going to be validated through whoever the receiver is, that they're communicating with. Um, I think it wants his independence, to not be codependent. There's a lot of times where teenagers, they want independence, but in some right, they're still codependent. And I think that that can be a conflict of interest, between being dependent and codependent. So I think there's a lot of things a teenage mind want, and those are just a few, and I can go on and on. But uh, just yesterday, having a call that I had, that young lady, she wanted honesty. She wanted communication, which was amazing because values like that, you would think a mature mind can be great at communicating, but we're human, and no matter what age we are, we might not be that great at it. But she wanted those things from people in her life, and that was pretty awesome to see.
Yeah, man, I hear that. I'm getting a little choked up because my daughter is about to graduate high school, and I would say within the last 6 months to a year, I felt this pull, kind of this inner voice say, Dave, you got to let go, bro.
Let go a little bit, yeah. You
You
got to let
know?
go a little bit, just a little bit more. Just a
Yep.
little bit more.
And I think, my faith is very strong. And I think it
Mhm.
was God's message to me saying, Dave, let go of control for the benefit of you both. And I chose to do that. And it was hard because,
Scary.
oh, man, because, she's getting her license and her
Mhm.
grandparents give her a car
Mhm.
that's older than she is. This car is 21 years
Right.
old. It's a badass Chevy truck, and I think she's going to get into some trouble, but you just got to
Hold
let
tight.
go, and for my daughter who has a hard time being seen anyways,
Mhm.
um, to give her her own voice without a whole lot of pressure and
Yeah,
control from me. Um, I I just felt like it was the best thing for all of us involved, her mom, me, my daughter, and she's flourishing as she transitions and pivots to online education to finish out high school. And dad's rightfully so put on the back burner for a little bit.
for sure, for sure. And there's another one that stands out. They want trust. Within that letting go, they want trust, which is delicate because we all, I mean, most of us know in our field, we know that, the human mind, doesn't stop developing. The brain doesn't stop developing until you're about 25, right? And so we're talking about, your prefrontal and all the other aspects of the brain that are still developing to make rational, mature or growth, decisions. But it's crazy because part of the learning is through mistakes as well, right? And so perfection
Still
in my
learning that.
right, so part of it is, perfection in my opinion is an illusion, right? It doesn't exist. And so, we want to, as parents, I have a 3-year-old, so I have a long ways away before I, embrace what you're going through. I commend you. But yeah, it's just they want that trust, and they're gonna make mistakes, hopefully not the ones that are so life altering that it's gonna take 20 years to, come back from. But yeah, there's no right way. There's no right way. Each family, each kid, each parent it's unique to them.
Yeah, I felt that within the last year or so. The more she gains identity and her
Yeah,
own voice, the more I want to respect it,
yeah,
and that was hard, man,
for
as
sure.
a father. So let's let's move on to, what does the leader's mind want?
Mm, and the leader with the ego or the leader without the ego, right?
Ooh, bro.
So it's we again, I just come from a personal experience. I always like to share my stories. I was a leader for a big corporation at one point. And they break you down into, thought leader, driver, and all that good stuff. And I think a lot of that goes into your personality. Me particularly, I was a thought leader. So, I thought things through, but also delegated. Uh, I think some leaders want control. And then some leaders want the celebration to be solely on them from the positive result, right? is that egotistical or is it not?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it varies, but I think the leadership that we all really, visualize, that we all really aspire to be, to embrace, that leader wants to develop those who work underneath that leader to be great employees and ultimately leaders themselves. They want to grow a community and people underneath them to be better even than what they were. They want to see other people celebrate and be better. So they want to see them grow. They want to see them flourish. So they delegate responsibility and they put trust in that. And even if it doesn't go well, they go back and they assess and analyze, and it's a team effort. So yeah, it's with the ego, without the ego, it depends on who you are and how you want to lead. Some people want leadership to where they can climb the ladder and step on other people, and they can say they did it. You know, so yeah, yeah,
Yep, and that takes a lot of quote unquote leadership out of their role.
right.
That puts a lot of control and recognition on them. And how I like to shift my mindset in that
Mm-hmm.
situation is from control and recognition in my leadership role is to ownership.
Yeah, yeah.
I own my decisions as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
The results are shared by the team,
Right, right,
because every person involved is a piece of the puzzle.
right.
And what I learned from multiple businesses that I own is that I can't do it by myself.
No, none of us can, man. None of us. None of us.
Absolutely not. And there's no such thing as over communication from a leadership
Not
role.
at all. Not at all. I agree.
And you were talking about that communication between a teenager's mind and a leader's mind,
Mm-hmm.
like how does a teenager find its voice?
Right.
And George Bernard Shaw says the greatest fallacy when it comes to communication is the assumption that it takes place.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Like someone's really gonna communicate. If they made a mistake, it's no guarantee that it's gonna happen. Even in relationships, right? You've been doing your great, dating podcast, and how many times have you probably heard in your, 50 plus videos, communication being something of importance and two people creating somewhat of a healthy relationship, at least at its foundation, its foundational level. And I don't think assumption was correlated with that word. It was more so each person being willing and open and vulnerable to communicate, whether good, bad, or indifferent.
Mm-hmm.
Just expressing, being able to do so.
Mm-hmm. And what it's come down to, that's a very good point, is that over time, a consistent message has come up from my pre-interview questionnaire. The number one thing holding people back in relationships is fear. But the
Sure.
next most important theme that comes up is communication. And when we go even further now, after 2 years of hosting a podcast, it's now comprehension of the communication that is most
Right.
important.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
I can talk
Yeah.
all
It's
day long.
you and me both, man. I'm right there with you, man. We can talk all day, right? But if it's not being received or understood, or the person doesn't know how to, I mean, it could be even down to a word. You can use a sentence and put a word in a sentence and you just lose the person. I mean, it's that finite.
Yeah, completely, man. And what I've come to love about the Enneagram as a tool for personal growth is
Mhm.
that each of the 9 types hear in a different way and they communicate in a different way.
Yeah.
And even when you use the word direct communication, there are 2 or 3 personality types that are known to be direct
Yeah.
in their communication, but they're still saying
Right.
on the surface 2 different things, and underneath the surface, they're meaning a completely different thing.
Right. Right. Right.
And that's where the comprehension comes in, is like we got to ask at least one more question, maybe 2 more questions to get to the comprehension level while we're communicating with our partner.
Right. Right. Yeah. Something I would say I've learned personally with relationships and communication and all of that, connection is something that I value. I really value connection. Um, and what I've learned in terms of how do I get to a point where I connect with someone, whether it's business, whether it's friendship, whether it's an intimate relationship, um, curiosity, man, just being curious about the other person, not really thinking for myself or just thinking about me, but really being curious about the other person, what they have going on in their lives, what's on their mind, what's on their heart. Just genuinely being curious about somebody else has allowed space to be held for that person to express. And I can be a little over curious because, I can sit down and talk with somebody and then I'll ask a question. And from the response, I got three more questions, right? And all of a sudden, 2 hours go by, and they're like, I haven't talked about you at all. It's all good,
Yeah.
I talk about me unless you really want, if you ask a question, I'll answer it. But I'm curious about you.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's personal experience.
Yeah, I can relate to that a lot. I was just reading an article earlier about how to spot a narcissist, and this is what I do in my workday. Is I read and I I digest some information, and what you're talking about there, those 2 to 3 follow-up questions, is empathy.
For sure.
So, what does the empathic mind want?
The empathic mind. Great question.
It's a trick question.
Yeah, it is, right? Because, it's in essence, you're wanting something for yourself, but for somebody else at the same time. And we don't have to go that far, but
Now let's do it. Let's get curious. Let's get curious about that because
let's get
I think I'm
curious.
following you. Yeah,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
right, so let's talk empathy, right? It's putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. Whether it's a good experience or a bad experience, right? It's empathy. I think people misconstrue sympathy and empathy. It's always sympathetic. Empathy is what you're really going after. It's really putting yourself in that person's shoes. So what does an empathetic mind want? Um, I think the empathetic mind wants the receiver of the empathy to understand that they are being acknowledged. That the person that's sharing the empathy is, I'm here with you. I think that works a lot in suicide ideation. I have a dear friend, very close friend of mine who I love dearly. Again, curiosity led our conversation down this path. And Dave, this conversation basically, and I've had maybe 2 or 3 really good stories around actual suicide attempts, but not really going through with them because of empathy. And so the experience was I was in the middle of cutting myself. I knew I pretty much hit like a major artery. And I ended up calling 911. I said, well, what made you call 911? You're in the middle of this mental place and then this physical behavior. And the person said, well, I remember a month earlier, uh, my relative told me that they would be lost without me. And I harvested that and I thought about it over and over. And in that moment, I just thought about that conversation that if I go through with this person will be hurt pretty much forever because of my act. And I said, do you know what you exercise in the moment of actually attempting to commit suicide? The person goes, no, I don't. I said, it was empathy. You thought about how somebody else would have felt if you carried this out. And he just went, he was like, wow, I never thought about it that way. And I was like, that's powerful that you were still able to access that kind of empathy when you're in the place of suicidation, you don't really think about, it's not really about everybody else. It's about you and wanting to get rid of that pain you're experiencing. But that little 1% or whatever the percent is, they exercise some empathy, which it gives hope that, any further suicide attempts later on have a doorway for some empathy, you know. And so, yeah, empathy is, it's critical. I think it's critical.
Yeah, it's hard to do. It's hard to get there. It's hard to come by it naturally. I know I certainly don't.
Yeah,
And
for
I
sure.
love what you said earlier about communication, is that in my philosophy, curiosity is the bridge that builds connection,
Yeah, yeah,
or curiosity builds the bridge to connection.
for sure.
And why I said it was a trick question of like, what does the empathetic mind want, is it comes from the heart.
Yeah,
It's not so
for
much like
sure.
a willpower from your mind that gets you to a place of empathy.
Mhm,
It literally is knowing when to shut up
mhm.
and listen
Yeah,
and be an active listener. We were writing about that the other day in a blog post. Um, just actively listening, and how do we, from the heart, make our partner feel heard?
Yeah.
What's your best advice there?
So that being a question, man, I could talk for hours about that. There's a lot of nonverbal. Let's give an example, right? This is a common one. Uh, Husband or wife, I don't want to have gender, specifics, but husband or wife or significant other gets home from work or a busy day, and there's a lot going on in that experience outside of the home. Well, there's a lot on that person's mind to, want to filter. They want to filter that experience. How was your day? Um, we're going to sit down and have a conversation about it. I'm just going to sit there and listen. Now, how do I listen? Making eye contact, putting away, devices of any sort. I might even turn them on vibrate if, it's busy. And I'm going to hold space. I'm going to look this person in the eyes. I'm going to sit there. I may even do head nods, right? We talk about those kinds of nonverbal and just be with that person. And questions always come out of actively listening. Lately, I've been looking at digestively listening, right? Where you take something in and you really carry it out in your behavior. So we're not just taking in material, but we're going to digest what's being said to me, right? It's going to feed my soul, go inside my psyche. But for someone to feel heard, you're present, you're looking, you're giving them that eye contact. Body language, that can be tricky. I know for me, as an over 6 foot opposing male, sometimes I would have shoulders facing a woman and I'm listening, I'm so in tune into the conversation. And they may feel intimidated, because of the posture. So sometimes I might turn on an angle and lessen up that energy and still make the eye contact. And so those are just little small things that go a long way. Paraphrasing what you've heard. If you hear something, you recite back to the person. So it sounds like what I'm hearing, this is what you said. Is that accurate? Yes, no, this is what I really meant. Okay. It's just actually engaging, and not listening to speak, really just being with that person. So those are just a few things that really help a person be heard. And as a coach, yesterday alone, Dave, I had five, it was Mother's Day. I had 5 different types of interactions with people, whether it be message or phone call. Then right after a phone call about a breakup and cheating, I ended up getting on a phone call with a friend whose mother-in-law passed away the night before on pretty much Mother's Day. There's a lot of active listening going on yesterday. There was a lot of listening going on, but I love it. That's what I do, man. I love
Mm-hmm. It's accomplishable over technology.
it. Yeah, it is for sure.
It's it's not impossible to connect over technology like we are now. It's harder
Yeah,
because I'm a physical touch guy. I
yeah.
like to I like to actively listen with a hand on somebody's elbow or their wrist,
Right.
or you
Mm-hmm.
know, I haven't dated in a while, because
It's
um,
coming.
I specifically put on my list of to dos this year not really to date that much,
For
so
sure.
like, and I'm grateful for this opportunity of solitude to practice empathy for myself, compassion, self-compassion, practice empathy for my family members. And then, man, like, have conversations like this where I'm digesting what you're saying as opposed to just hosting a podcast episode,
For sure. Yeah. Likewise. Likewise.
you know? So I really appreciate how you framed the empathy and active listening, because when I was writing about this last week, those are the key points that I wrote down, and a question that I like to follow up a moment like that is, if it wasn't clear ahead of time that the person just wanted to talk and be heard, hey, are you looking for my help? Do you want
Right.
me to help you solve the problem? Or are you just listening, just
For sure.
needing me to listen right now?
Hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
a good clarifying, curious question like that
Yeah.
can sometimes further the conversation even more,
Hmm.
build connection between the two people involved,
Right.
and finally just making the opportunity for your partner to feel heard.
Definitely. Yeah. It's we like to use the term holding space. It's taking up energy and time, and it's like you said. You want me to help you problem solve through this, or do you just want me to be here? You know, um, I had that same kind of conversation when my friend said, "Hey, well, my girlfriend's mom just died. I don't really know what to say." As someone who's been through a lot of grief and have seen a lot of death and experienced it on many different levels, there's no right thing to say in terms of death, but just being there. If you can physically be there, whether it's holding, which makes it harder. We got into that conversation. Well, you got COVID, right? Are we hugging? Am I actually going to be able to go to the funeral? We're going to have a funeral. So now there's even more limitations on different ways to be there, when someone's grieving or holding space. I can say all the words, in the universe, but sometimes touch is needed. Well, touch is a little hindered right now. So yeah, we got to be creative. We got to be really creative.
Yeah, it's breaking my heart right now, man, that like my sister and I drove to the cabin to see my folks yesterday, and I step out of the car. I've seen my mom once in the last 2 months, and like my natural instinct is to go give her a hug. It's Mother's
Right.
Day. And, I stopped and I was like, can I hug you? And she said, no, and it was just like,
Mm,
it was so heartbreaking for me,
sure.
to be in a beautiful place like the Colorado mountains, but also intentionally spending time with my family,
Mhm.
making the effort to drive the 2 hours, which was my sister's idea. It was an amazing idea. And
Yeah.
um, I'm holding space for myself on the weekends now, not adding work, not adding social events, which is phenomenal for me to sacrifice
Yeah. Yeah. No.
so that I can have a more enriching life
Mhm.
with all of my intentions behind it.
Right. Right. And man, a lot of us, man, we didn't know what we really had until we were deprived of it. It's kind of like forced deprivation right now. All the way from food to shelter in some essence, money, touch, attention. You know, it's an attention from the right people. Whether sometimes I have a 3-year-old and love her dearly, right? But sometimes you want to have a conversation with another adult, and just talk about life and connect on that level. So it's we're being deprived. It may feel that way, not I wouldn't say on purpose, but regardless of the perspective, there's change. It's
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable. There's change. We either
Mm-hmm.
adapt or we don't. Unique to the individual, as I always say.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. And I wrote down a word, like I'm taking notes while we talk, and that's how I digest things. And
Mhm.
we're going away from instant gratification on almost every
Man.
level, and we're being
Mm,
encouraged in a position of solitude to find delayed gratification as a really good thing right now.
really, yep, exactly, Dave. 100% agree again, man. It's been taught a lot. Again, depending on how you want to look at it, you're being taught a lot about yourself, about your relationships, about work, about your life. You've been
Mm-hmm.
taught a lot. And I was just having this conversation. That New Year's ball at the end of this year, it's gonna be probably one of the more emotional New Year's, coming into 2021 in the history of, the world. Just because so many lives were lost, during this pandemic and lives were altered. And man, New Year, man, we all make it there, of course. It's gonna put a lot in perspective. This is a time in history for sure.
Yeah. And it teaches us what to be grateful for.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's my part of my daily morning routine is 3 statements of gratitude, why it's important to me, and as a result, what can I find from it, or what can I feel from it. and
Yeah.
and I know that moments like you're describing on New Year's this coming year will be joyous
Man.
for more reasons than ever before.
Hmm. Yeah.
Holidays, you know, I woke up this morning and I'm thinking about Father's Day
Right.
because Mother's Day is yesterday. And I'm like, how do I celebrate Father's Day?
Right.
And speaking of, how are you guys co-parenting right now?
So we do the exchange. We still do the exchange well. Of course, within the distance, everything's been well, taking proper precautions with masks and all that. But all that is still going according to plan. We both are essential workers. I'm in mental health, and she's a nurse, so we're very cognizant of um, taking those measures. But
Mhm.
so far, everything's been working out well. Especially with the 3-year-old and the
Yeah, I remember Madison at 3 years old, man. She was a blast.
twin.
But I also remember how challenging it was as we were divorcing or just coming out of our divorce. Last month was 15 years, and yesterday being Mother's Day, I I have become more and more grateful for how hard my daughter's mom has worked for the two of them over
For
the
sure,
last 15 years.
for sure.
And she deserves that recognition, you know. No matter
Definitely.
where our relationship stands at
Right.
any one point, she deserves that recognition.
I agree. I agree. We made something for my daughter to make her to hang up inside the home. Communicated with the Happy Mother's Day, and just making sure that that recognition was there. The ego gets tricky, man. No matter how many years removed, right? Your ego still wants to find all these whatever reasons that it's heaviness for no reason. Safety or whatever the illusion is. But you got to fight through that. And part of that is thinking outside of yourself and what's best for your little one or the kids. And it depends on your personal development. How much have you worked on you to be able to have communication like that, especially if you're not, in a relationship anymore. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of practice. A lot.
And that's a key word too, is it's a practice.
Yeah.
You don't suddenly step out of the gate one morning and wake up and you're like, you know what? I'm going to be a completely changed person today.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
going to respect my ex.
Right.
No, man. I mean, it was a decade worth of hard work,
Yeah.
and neither one of us gave up on our daughter,
Yeah.
you know, and
That's important.
mhm.
Yeah.
And neither one of us gave up on ourselves either, you know, like there were some real low points on either side. Um, I recall a summer when Madison's mom wasn't going through a great season in her life, and she would call up and say, "Hey, can you spend the time with Madison right now?" And without making space or holding space for my ex,
Mhm.
without being there, quote unquote, for my ex, I was still there for
Mhm.
the family unit, you know, the
Yeah.
structure, the dynamic that we had created just by spending that time with my daughter
For sure.
and being grateful for it too.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's tricky, but it's worth it. At the end of the day, it's worth it. It's all ties into the mental well-being of that young mind. Again, we talked about the teenage mind. So if you some teenage minds, they want an identity, right? But what if you go through a separation? The identity can be skewed. It can be pulled in two different aspects. You live with mom, you live with dad, and my room's like this. Here, it's this. It's a lot. It's a lot on the child, and that can create some challenges from a personal development standpoint. Um, I've seen that personally working in a residential treatment facility with at-risk youth. Seen it full on, Dave. I mean, it's I commend you. I do. I commend you for being able to stay the course with all the little lows that come with it, because it's not easy at all.
No, it certainly isn't. And we did the best that we could.
Mhm.
And now that you bring up at risk youth, I've got to give a shout out to that kiddo of mine
Mhm.
because she put her head down this year when her high school shut down and they had to transition to online education, which
Yeah.
we're more than set up to do technologically speaking
Mhm.
in our world today. But she's had her eyes set on a psychology degree and
Awesome.
working with at-risk youth through music therapy. That's her path through
Wow.
college, and I've just got to give a shout out to this freaking awesome kid that we have.
That's great, man. That's great. And just from what I've heard, and her story, from what I've heard from you, I second that shout out. I do. a lot of trials and tribulations through it all, and that's great to hear that she has a path that she would like to go down. I wish her well. I wish her well with that.
Hmm. Yeah, she was really funny. We were having lunch one day and she's giving me a hard time for like, all right, she's 17 and we're starting to get like
Right.
become friends and she's
Yeah.
giving me a hard time for checking out the waitress. She goes, she goes, Dad, that girl went to my high school last year. And I'm like, oh no. I mean, like, did I just lose my daughter's respect right
For
there? But
sure, yeah.
what this moment over lunch really did for us, and this is pretty recent, I got a lot of respect for this kid, but she might be the funniest person I've ever met. So we're catching up. We haven't seen each other in a few weeks, and I'm like, hey, are you still dating that young kid that I heard you were dating? And she's like, oh no. And she tells me the story, and the way that she was speaking about
Mhm,
her relationship was so emotionally intelligent and
mhm,
aware at her 17 years old
mhm,
that
yeah.
like my jaw drops to the table because one minute she's giving me a hard time for checking out the waitress, and
Mhm.
then next she's explaining to her father in a completely authentic and natural way
Right.
what was the reason that caused the end of her budding relationship as she's a senior in high school. And
Mhm.
I just had this moment with my daughter and it made my heart grow, and I didn't even know what to say. I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
Madison, I'm really impressed with how mature you just described your own life.
You get credit. You and mom get credit for allowing her to develop that, to be free-willed and discovering that part of her. And I mean, the sky's the limit with that growth, man, as far as her building healthy relationships. For her to be able to identify now at 17, the 25-year-old Madison is going to be remarkably aware of what she wants and does not want, and that's going to be awesome. You're gonna look at it and just be sitting there again, like, well, you got it somewhat figured out. I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, man, we are very blessed, and
Mhm,
I can't wait to see her grow into that woman that she is becoming already,
mhm.
and
Yeah,
that's another tribute to the season in our lives of like how adaptable we are around Mother's Day,
yeah, yeah,
how adaptable we will have to be for Father's Day, and
for sure.
how flexible we are in letting go of control as our children grow up.
Mhm. Definitely, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Kevin, if your message resonated with somebody today, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
I got an Instagram about 6 months ago. I haven't figured out how I want to use it. It's unconscious remastered, but primarily on Facebook. You
Mm-hmm.
can find me on Facebook. Have a lot of projects that I'm working on. I think 2 years ago I mentioned to you I was writing a book. Well, I changed up the title and just a little sneak peek about the book. It's going to be called A Book with Nothing in It. It's the title of it, A Book with Nothing in It. So, yeah, I got that in the works. But Facebook, you can find me on Facebook, and it's just my name, Kevin Coates. And, shoot me a message. We can talk and follow the little series that I do. I have some videos coming out as well on how I got through my 20 years of trauma for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Just how I got through losing a loved one, things like that. So,
Mm.
yeah, Facebook primarily for sure.
Of course. Yeah. I tagged you in this Facebook Live, and I'll be sure to
Okay,
put all your details in the show notes when we produce this as a podcast episode.
sounds good.
Before I let you go, is there one message that you want to send us off with?
Man, one message. Give me one message, huh, Dave? Just one. I got 30 messages, man.
Just one.
One message. I got you. During these times right now, find out your foundation of self. At the very baseline, find out who you are at the very baseline foundation of who you are. The good, the bad, the ugly, the not so great, the flaws. Get a really deeper understanding of that. Learn to accept that. Learn to add forgiveness. understand what your values are, what's important to you. I think when you get around these concepts and you add those to your foundation of self, your relationships of all sorts, they're gonna manifest in something great, especially after this pandemic. So find out your foundation of self, no matter what age you're at. Foundation of self.
Phenomenal, man. I
Yeah,
couldn't agree more that self-awareness is the key to unlocking your life's true potential.
yeah, for sure.
And here at the podcast, we talk about 5 pillars
Mhm.
of optimal health, and more on that later. But you know, if there's ever an opportunity for us to gather a group of men to do
Yeah,
a virtual conversation like this, just hit me up, and I'd be happy to jump on and be a co-facilitator with you.
yeah, no, let's put something together, man. We can do that, and let's do it.
Okay.
I'm with it.
Okay. What the world needs most now is self-led men who are showing empathy for themselves and their partners and their
I
loved ones.
agree. I agree, Dave. Yeah, let's get together and put something out there and just have a conversation. And we'll see what comes out of it. The goal is for growth and abundance and joy and all those uplifting feelings and emotions. And I think we can create something with that.
I agree. Well, it was my pleasure, Kevin, to host you. Uh,
Likewise,
so glad we got the live video to go through this week,
for sure.
and let me know how I can help you in the future. I just absolutely love your message.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you having me on and continue to do the great work you're doing. And we'll be in contact always. If I can help you in any way, I'll be here, my guy.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. Have
All
a
right,
wonderful
Dave.
day.
You too now.
Dude, awesome. Thank you.
Cool.